Okay guys, so now it's time for social studies. You need your social studies book out and you need your vocabulary notebook out and open to a clean page in the social studies section. Okay, so for now, go ahead and open your book to page 364. We're talking about a new region today, so first we're gonna look at an overview of that region, and we'll talk about that. So let's look at the key, because I see that we have two different colors of states in this region. So we have the mountain states, which are purple and include Montana, Idaho. It's kind of, I took a picture of your book, so you can see it better than I can. Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Nevada. Those are all of the mountain states. We can assume that they are called that because the Rocky Mountains run through those states. Then we have this light blue, which are the Pacific states, and those include Washington, Oregon, and California. All of those states are bordered on the west by the Pacific Ocean, so we can assume that is why they're given the name the Pacific States. Really quick, let's look for all of the capital cities. So we're looking for those stars, those cities that are marked by stars rather than circles. And in Washington, D.C., Washington State, we see Olympia. Right here is the capital city. In Oregon, we see that Salem is the capital city. In California, we have Sacramento, right here. In Nevada, we have Carson City, which is very close to California. It's not far from California's capital. In Idaho, we have, let's see, I think I'm pointing to it, maybe Boise, right around here. Yep, there we are. I see it now. Montana, we see Helena, right about here. Wyoming, we have Cheyenne down at the bottom eastern corner, the southeastern corner. And then in Utah, we have Salt Lake City, which is right here under this dot. That is the capital of Utah. And then in Colorado, we have Denver, which is also right underneath this little orange dot, showing us an inset of Denver and then Salt Lake City. Okay, well, we see a whole lot of national forests and national parks in the west. Oh my goodness, I completely forgot about two other Pacific states, Alaska and Hawaii. And the capital of Alaska is, I can never remember if it's Juneau or Anchorage, but I think it is Juneau, which is, oh, right here. Right here is the capital of Alaska, which is Juneau. And then the capital of Hawaii is Honolulu, which is right here. It's actually not on the largest island, it's on one of the others, which is maybe surprising to some of you. Can't believe I forgot about those. Remember, the 48 states that are all connected are the continental states, but then we also have Alaska and Hawaii that don't actually touch any other state in the United States, but they are still owned and governed by the United States. Okay, yes, so we see a whole lot of national parks out in the west. There are lots of mountains, lots of forests, lots of really cool places that have become national parks over the years. We'll go through some of them. We see that Alaska has 8 national parks all by itself. Should I kind of cut it off a little bit? Yes, Alaska has 8 national parks in one state. It has Kobuk Valley National Park, Gates of the Arctic National Park, which is up here, Denali National Park, Katmai National Park, Lake Clark National Park, Kenai Fjords National Park, Wrangell St. Elias National Park, and Glacier Bay National Park. So if you ever go to Alaska, you might have a chance to add 8 national parks. They're all throughout the state. You can you can look at it more clearly on your map to find exactly where each one is. And they are numbered. So we see this spot right here is numbered with a 2. So that means that is Gates of the Arctic National Park. Remember, you're looking for the dark green to show national parks. In Hawaii, we have 2 national parks. We have Haleakala National Park, and Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Washington State has, I think, 3 national parks all by itself. Olympic National Park, Mount Rainier National Park, and North Cascades National Park. Oregon has 1 national park at Crater Lake National Park. California has quite a few. It has Redwood National Park, Lassen Volcanic National Park, Yosemite National Park, which I know Daisy's been to because they went right before Dwyer was in my class and she told me all about it. Let's see, Kings Canyon National Park and Sequoia National Park, which are very close to each other. Death Valley National Park, which I have been to. Channel Islands National Park, and then Joshua Tree National Park. I've also been to Joshua Tree National Park. Nevada has a national park at Great Basin National Park, which is somewhere in here. I really can't tell on this map on the board. The color is just not good. Idaho does not actually have any national parks, but it is very close to Yellowstone National Park up in northwestern Wyoming. It actually does have a teeny bit of the national park, and then Grand Teton National Park. My brother, you guys know, my brother moved to Idaho earlier this school year, and he moved right around here. He actually works now right outside of Grand Teton National Park. So hopefully when I go visit him, I've never been to either of these national parks, but now maybe I can add them, because you guys know one of my goals is to go to all the national parks one day. Montana has a national park. They have Glacier National Park. That's definitely one of the ones I really want to go to. If you look at pictures, it looks beautiful. Let's see. Utah has a few. It has Zion National Park and Bryce Canyon National Park, not far away. And then Arches National Park, and right below that is Canyonlands National Park. So they have 5 in that one state. And then Colorado has a few. It has Mesa Verde National Park. I've been there. And Rocky Mountain National Park. I've also been there. So I've already been there. I don't have to add those, but I would love to go back. So again, if you ever have a chance, go to as many as you can. And then we see that much of this region is covered in national forests. We couldn't even name them all. We would be here for the next hour just naming all of these national forests. That's because this region is pretty forested and there's a lot of mountains. That's why they have all these protected areas that have become national parks. There's not too much desert-like areas except for Southern California and maybe a little bit in the southern Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. But it's mostly mountainous and forested. Okay, let's go ahead and we will go ahead and start on Chapter 12, Lesson 1. Okay, guys, so now go ahead and open your textbook to page 374. You also need to go ahead and open up make sure your vocabulary notebook is open, and the title of today's notes is Chapter 12, Lesson 1, and then of course you need today's date. So as we go, we'll go ahead and define our vocabulary. I've also got our map up again. I know it's hard to see with the coloring and the light and the glares and all that, but at least it'll give you a general idea of where I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and start reading on page 374. Geography of the West. It's all downhill from here, your mom says. It's a good thing, you answer, still panting. You have just climbed part of Grand Teton, the highest peak in Wyoming. You look out over nearby peaks. They're all covered with snow. You know that if you could see far enough, you would see the Pacific Ocean to the west. You also know, however, that hundreds of miles of mountains and valleys stretch between you and the ocean. Rockies to the Pacific. The Rocky Mountains run through North America from north to south. They mark the end of the Midwest and the beginning of the West. So we know the Rocky Mountains run from down in Mexico all the way up through the United States. That is where, so it's, the Rocky Mountains are right along the very eastern borders of these western states, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and this the southwestern state, Arizona. No, New Mexico. I'm sorry, I'm having a morning. Anyway, so that is where the Midwest ends and the West begins. But we don't consider these little pieces of Colorado and Wyoming and Montana that happened before the Rocky Mountains as part of the Midwest, because we just say the whole state, most of the state is covered by the Rocky Mountains and is to the west, so therefore the whole state is part of the West. Mountains and more. The Rocky Mountains are among the highest mountains in North America. Remember, we learned that's because they are some of the youngest mountains in North America. The older mountains, like the Smoky Mountains, have been kind of rounded out by erosion over the years. An imaginary line runs north and south along their peaks. This line is called the Continental Divide. So, our first word is the word continental, make sure I spelled that right, divide. And notice that both of those words are capitalized. This is the official name of this imaginary line. So like the equator and like the prime meridian, it is capitalized. So what it is an imaginary line that runs north and, oh gosh, we don't need to capitalize south, and south along the peaks of the Rocky Mountains. And notice that Rocky Mountains is also capitalized because it is the official name of that mountain range. So the Continental Divide runs all the way across the peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Remember, the peaks are the highest points. So that means the highest points, which is usually right in the middle of that mountain range, is where the Continental Divide runs across. All rivers to the east of this line flow towards the Atlantic Ocean. So here's the line. So all the rivers to the east flow towards the Atlantic Ocean. So they flow east, from west to east, to the Atlantic Ocean. All rivers west of this line flow towards the Pacific Ocean. So to the west of this Continental Divide, all of these rivers over here flow towards the Pacific River. So they flow from east to west. While on this side of the country, the rivers flow from west to east. To the west of the Rockies, the Great Basin forms a huge desert. The Columbia Plateau lies to its north. The Colorado Plateau lies to its south. So that's right about in here. Remember I said parts of the southern parts of these states, of Utah, Nevada, and California, are still desert-like. That's the Great Basin. The Colorado, I read that already. Farther west are mountain ranges that run parallel to the Pacific coast. They include the Sierra Nevada and the Cascade and Coast Ranges. Alaska and Hawaii have mountains as well. Remember, we talked about this a long time ago when we first started social studies. We talked about how we had the Rocky Mountains, and then we had the Great Basin, and then along the western coast we had the Sierra Nevada mountains down in the southern part of California, and then we have the coastal mountain range, and then up here I think is the Cascade mountain range. Highs and lows. The highest land and the lowest land in the United States are both in the west. The highest is the 20,320 foot peak of Alaska's Mount McKinley. I don't think it's called Mount McKinley anymore. I think it's called Denali. And that is the largest, the highest peak. The highest point of the United States is in Alaska, and it's 20,320 feet above sea level. I'm not exactly sure where it is. I know it's in Denali National Park, which, if I go back to the map of the whole west, where is that map? I should have marked the page. Sorry about that. Where is it? Okay, I gotta put this. This is getting in the way, this pointer. Okay, where is it? I should have marked that page. Ah, I found it. Page 364. Let's see. It's in Denali National Park, which is right about here. So this is where the highest point in the entire United States is, right around here at Mount McKinley, which I think might be called Denali now. I'm not quite sure though, so we'd have to look it up. Now let me get back. It is also known as Denali, there we go, only I read just a little bit ahead, which means the Great One in a Native American language. The lowest is 280 feet below sea level in Death Valley, California. So Death Valley, California is right around here. And so the highest and the lowest points in the whole United States, we've got Mount McKinley, 20,320 feet above sea level, which is the highest point in the United States. And then we've got Death Valley right here in California, which is at 282 feet below sea level. That means under, like, so it's down below. And that's in California. And those are the highest and the lowest points in the United States. Let's go ahead and turn the page and keep reading. Big changes. Long ago, changes happening deep inside the earth formed mountains in the west. The same kinds of changes are still going on today. Fiery mountains. Some of the West's mountains are volcanoes. A volcano is a mountain formed when erupted lava cools and hardens onto Earth's surface. So, number 2 is the word volcano. And what a volcano is a mountain formed when erupted lava cools and hardens on Earth's surface. So I know you knew what a volcano was, but now you have the official definition. A mountain formed when erupted lava cools and hardens on Earth's surface. Lava is melted rock. So lava is what erupts, and it is melted rock. So it is rock that has gotten so hot that it is now in its liquid form. Remember, any solid, at its melting point, it turns from a solid into a liquid. A bowl-shaped area called a crater can form at the volcano's top. So, number 4 is the word crater, which is a bowl-shaped area of land. So we've got the volcano formed by the lava, and then we've got the crater at the top. That's a very quick drawing, but you get the idea. Most volcanoes in the West are in states that border the Pacific Ocean. So most of the volcanoes, you won't find as many in the inner states, the mountain states, but you'll find quite a few volcanoes along the western coast, along the Pacific Ocean in those Pacific states. These include Mauna Loa in Hawaii, Mount Rainier in Washington, and Mount Hood in Oregon. Down at the bottom, we have a picture of a volcano. This is Mount St. Helens, and Mount St. Helens in Washington, it's in Washington State, erupted in 1980. This event created one of the largest volcanic eruptions ever recorded in North America. So that actually happened not too long ago. I remember learning about that when I was in school, though it wasn't 1980, but it felt like much more recently. And it was crazy to me to think that this massive volcano had exploded in the United States, and it wasn't that long ago. Now it says it's the largest it's one of the largest volcanic eruptions ever recorded in North America, but that doesn't mean it was the largest. It just means there were definitely much larger volcanic eruptions in ancient times, but those weren't recorded because people didn't live there, or maybe weren't even around yet when it happened. But so out of recorded history, Mount St. Helens eruption was one of the largest. Shaky ground. Changes inside Earth can also cause earthquakes. An earthquake is a sudden shaking of the ground. So, I'm going to erase my terrible drawing of a volcano. And number 5 is the word earthquake. And an earthquake is a sudden shaking of the ground. So if the ground starts suddenly shaking and it's not because a big truck or something is passing by, it is an earthquake. Something from inside the earth is causing the ground to shake. This movement occurs along faults, cracks in the Earth's outer layer. So, number 6 is the word faults. Earthquakes happen along faults, and faults are cracks in Earth's outer layer. So you know from past years that the Earth is created in layers, and that outer layer, I think it's called the crust, is what cracks and creates faults. Well, as these faults move, let's keep reading and then we'll discuss it. Small movements along faults can cause earthquakes that people do not feel. Large movements can damage entire cities or even larger areas. So what happens is these cracks in the outer layer actually move against each other sometimes. And so very small movements may cause earthquakes that we don't even feel. Nobody even knows is happening, other than very delicate equipment, usually at earthquake research centers. But large movements, so when it moves a lot, that could cause a massive earthquake that can damage whole cities, towns, buildings, whatever. So it's kind of like, say, I'm trying to think of if you push your hands together really, really hard. Pretend like these are your two faults. Now you can move it just a little bit without, you can't really see what I'm doing, but I'm just kind of moving my hands back and forth, but it's just very small movements. But if I push really hard on one, they might move past each other, and that is what would cause that earthquake. Like volcanoes, most earthquakes in the West occur in states that border the Pacific Ocean. This is because the rock layers under the Pacific Ocean move against those of our continent. So this fault line that they're talking about is kind of right along the Pacific coast. It's very close to the edge of this coastline. And so we've got the rock layers under the Pacific Ocean, and then we've got a little fault, which is a crack, and then we've got the part of the Earth's crust that is underneath the United States. And so as those kind of move, that is when earthquakes happen. Some of them, these people in California can't even feel. Some of them cause major, major damage. Okay, let's do the reading check at the bottom. It says, what generalization can you make about volcanoes and earthquakes? So what a generalization is is when you, what can you say that is true about both volcanoes and earthquakes? So it's just a quick fact, but it's true for both volcanoes and earthquakes. So really quick, tell me one fact or a generalization that is true for both volcanoes and earthquakes. So pause this video, answer it under number 6, and then play to check your answer. Well, if you said that both are results of changes deep inside the earth, you are correct. Okay, let's move on to climate. Climate. The West's climate varies. It ranges from the heat of the California desert to the frozen land of northern Alaska. Mountains affect climate. Like other regions, the West has a warmer climate in the south than in the north. Why is that? Because the southern part is closer to the equator, which is the warmest part of the earth, and the northern part is closer to the North Pole, which is one of the coldest. As elevation increases, its many tall mountains also affect its climate. As elevation increases, the temperature drops. Remember, we learned that. It's because they're moving further up in the troposphere. A warm, rainy day in a valley may be a cold, snowy day on a nearby peak. Climate changes on mountain slopes affect plant life too. It is too cold for trees to grow above the timberline. So, let's see. I think I can fit this last word. I've actually got the last word, so I think I can fit it. Number 7 is the word timberline. And what it is an imaginary line above which it is too cold for trees to grow. And so that imaginary line kind of becomes a real line, because you can see, if you look at tall mountains, you can see where at some point the trees stop and you really only see rocks and maybe some snow. And that is the timberline. It means it's warm enough for trees to grow up to a certain point, but these mountains out in the west are so tall that they get too far up into the troposphere and it's too cold at the top of the mountain for trees to grow. And you can see that line, and that is the timberline. Below the timberline, forests thrive, setting records. The West's geography creates extreme climates. Death Valley is not only the country's lowest land, but also its driest and hottest. Its average yearly rainfall is less than 2 inches. That means less than 2 inches of rain fall in Death Valley. Sometimes we get 2 inches of rain just in a few days here. There, they get less than that in the whole entire year. The highest temperature ever recorded there was 134 degrees Fahrenheit in 1913. In contrast, the coldest temperature ever recorded in the United States was 80 degrees Fahrenheit below zero at Prospect Creek, Alaska. In the country's rainiest place, Mount Waialeale in Hawaii, it rains about 335 days each year. So that means out of an entire year, they get about 30 days where there's no rain, and the rest of the time it rains. So again, we learned the West is very different. It has both the lowest and the highest points. It also has the hottest and the coldest places in the United States. It also has the driest and the rainiest places in the United States. So the West is very, very diverse, mostly because it is so large. It is massive. And because of Hawaii and Alaska, it covers a very large amount of space, and it kind of hits all those different types of climate zones that the world has. So let's do the reading check on the bottom of page 377. We're going to make another generalization. Remember, a generalization is a fact that is true for more than one thing. So, what generalizations can you make about the West's climate? So what can you say that is true for the whole West? And this may not be one fact, it may be multiple facts. Okay, well, if you said something like it ranges from hot to cold, dry to wet, and dry to wet, then you are correct. Also, the mountains affect the climate. So a place with more mountains, it is cooler, because the higher up in the mountains you go, it'll be cooler. So they may have cooler average temperatures in more mountainous areas. Okay, let's turn to the page and we will talk about natural resources. Natural resources. A variety of natural resources can be found in the West. These resources include its land, forests, minerals, fuels, water, and fish. So what that means is we're going to see a pretty different looking land use and resource map than what we saw on Friday in the West. Because the West, there was really only a few things they could do. They could farm or ranch, and then they had a lot of metals and fuels and minerals as their resources. Whereas in the West, it varies much more, it varies much more. There we go. Land. Much of the land in the West is either too mountainous or too dry for farming. However, states along the Pacific coast have huge agricultural industries. California has long been the nation's leading agricultural state. Most of the state's crops are grown on irrigated land. Remember, we learned on Friday that irrigation is the bringing in of water from one place to another. Farmers in Oregon provide a variety of crops. These crops include grains, vegetables, and fruits. Washington is the nation's leading producer of apples. So if we look at California, Oregon, and Washington on this map, we see a whole lot of pink. Pink is where they use the land for fruits and vegetables. So we do see this is probably the most fruits and the most land out of any region that was used for fruits and vegetables, because along that western coast of these states, the climate is very good for fruits and vegetables. In the flatter, drier parts of the state, such as in Montana and Wyoming, ranching is important. So just like ranching was important in the Southwest, there's also some areas where the climate is pretty similar, where they also rely heavily on ranching. Ranchers in the region raise mostly cattle and sheep. And remember, cattle is cows. On the mountain slopes in the west, huge forests of pine, spruce, and fir grow. As in other regions, people harvest these trees to make lumber and paper products. In central California, giant trees called sequoias grow. Redwoods, the tallest living trees, grow near the coast from central California to southern Oregon. Many redwoods are more than 300 feet tall. Water. Although the West includes a lot of dry areas, the region has several major rivers. These include the Missouri, the Colorado, and the Columbia, and many smaller rivers. Great Salt Lake in Utah is the largest natural lake west of the Mississippi. The coastal waters of the northern Pacific Ocean are rich in fish and shellfish, including salmon, flounder, tuna, crabs, oysters, and clams. So when we read about the southwestern states on Friday, it wasn't really a good place where there were a lot of resources and land used for things like fishing and industries that require water. That's because most of those southwestern states were landlocked. That means they were nowhere near an ocean. Yes, we did have Texas, which does have part of its border bordering the Gulf of Mexico, but even then, it's not a whole lot of water in that region. Whereas the West, well, the entire western coast of the West is along an ocean. So there's a lot of, we can use a lot of that for water resources. And then there are also some major rivers and lakes throughout that region. So before we do the reading check and then talk about the summary, let's look at this resource map. Well, we see a whole lot, this is what I noticed, of gold. A whole lot of gold. That's why back in the 1800s there was a thing called the gold rush, which is in this chapter, but unfortunately we won't get to it, where lots of people came from the eastern side of the country to make a lot of money finding gold. And if you want to, you can read a little bit about it in, I think, the next lesson, about the early history of the West, if you're interested in that before you have to give the book back. So we see a lot of gold, a lot of silver as well. And then along the coast, we see that they can get a lot of fish, also along the coast of Alaska, a little bit in Hawaii. And then we see another major resource is coal in the mountains of Colorado and Wyoming. So that's probably mostly in the Rocky Mountains where they find a lot of coal. We see a good amount of oil and natural gas, mostly along the coast of California and up here in the plains right before the Rocky Mountains. Let's see. We see that a lot of the land is forest, whereas Friday when we did the West, there wasn't a whole lot of green land. There were a few little places, but here we have a lot of this dark green land where they use that land for forestry, so lumber and things like that. What else do we see a lot of? We see a lot of cattle and sheep, especially in these drier areas of the Great Basin. And then a little bit of wheat and grain along. Remember, this is closer to the Great Plains that come right before the Rocky Mountains. Okay, so now that we've looked at that map, I want you to use that to answer this question. What are some of the natural resources found in the West? Remember, the natural resources are indicated by the symbols, so don't get confused with the land uses, which are indicated by the colors. So what are some of the natural resources found in the West? Okay, and some examples are, land, forests, minerals, fuels, water, and fish and shellfish. The West, so now let's read the summary. The West is a vast region of mountains, basins, plateaus, and deserts. It also has extreme elevations and climates. Its natural resources include forests, minerals, and fish. So what we've learned in this chapter, that probably one of the most diverse regions within geography and climate and even natural resources is the West. It goes all across the scale, from hot to cold, from wet to dry, from very low under sea level to very high above sea level. It's very different, and that is partially because it is so large and because of Alaska and Hawaii covers so much land. Okay, so that's it for the lesson. Now you do have some homework. Let me go grab it. It is in your packet. It's the last page of your packet for Monday. It looks like this. Geography of the West. So what you're going to do, I think it's one-sided. There's not a back. Yep, correct. There is not a back. At the top, you will use the word bank to fill in the blanks. So make sure after you fill in the blank, read the sentence to make sure it makes sense. If you get to another question and you're like, wow, the only answers I have left don't make any sense at all, that means one of the answers you already filled out probably wasn't the best choice. So make sure you're choosing the best choice so that you don't get to another one and have none left that makes sense. Then on the bottom, you are going to use a pencil or a marker to shade states in the West on the map below. So you're only shading the states that are in the West, this region, the West, that our textbook considers. So don't shade anything that's considered part of the Southwest or the Northeast or the Midwest or the Southeast. Only shade the states that our textbook considers as part of the West. Okay, and then that's it. Go ahead, you can work on that right now, or you can wait until later as it is homework. But that's it for today's social studies lesson. We have one more social studies lesson on Wednesday, and then we're done with social studies. So go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, then reach out to me today between 1 and 5, and I'll help you out.